Yes. All right. Well, very warm welcome this morning, afternoon, evening to our next version of or next session of Elliot's dialogue with Ms. Carma Elliot. And I'm very excited about this conversation, and we'll talk more about Karma in a minute or so. First, my own introduction. My name is Atul. I'm a founder of Leadership at Humanity, an organization which is dedicated to ignite humanity back in leadership. Um, it's an important milestone, by the way, dialogue for us today, because in about 3 days' time, we complete our first year of Leadership at Humanity. So we are excited about the conversation, but also about our journey so far and what we have in store. With me, I have my other team members on the call today. I have with me Sophia, who's basically running the conversation. Sophia, maybe you can wave to everyone. We have Sakshi and we have Bhuvan, who are part of the team and supporting the dialogue. And I think Nyok also joined. I can't see her though on the call. And I have Sukunta, who is also on the call. So wonderful to have everyone. I am delighted to present Karma today. Karma, besides being a visionary leader and everything else she's done, which I will share in a moment, is also part of our advisory board. And it's very, very important milestone conversation for us, and great to have Karma, you joining us on this occasion and lead the dialogue. So a little bit about Karma. She is currently the president of United World College, Southeast Asia, actually the inaugural president who laid down the strategy for 50 years of expansion of the institutes in Southeast Asia. United World College, those of you who probably may or may not know about it, it's one of the most respected or well-respected institute, which is focused on not only building skills and capabilities, but building character in the students. I know for sure, being having the chance of living in Singapore, Karma, it's very difficult to get into your institute. So I know how important it is and how critical it is for the work which you're doing to help and build the leaders of the future. So this dialogue is very close personally to my heart, because I'm a big believer, as we envisioned Leadership at Humanity, that the conversation or the discussion or awareness about building character needs to start early on in the lives of the students, so that by the time they shape their own destiny and by the time they start kind of providing stewardship or leadership to the world, they already have some deeper understanding of how critical it is to lead with character. So this is a very important dialogue, and I'm actually curious, while I'll be facilitating some of the conversations, to hear your perspective and see what can be done in the world to introduce this aspect early on in the lives of the students. Karma has been a career diplomat. She has lived and worked in different parts of the world, leading a diplomatic career in UK, in Europe, in Saudi Arabia, in China. Has done significant amount of work to upbring the quality of life, has worked with large NGOs, transforming those, and especially the one in China, to bring it to a global forum and give it a shape where it is able to create or improve the value or value for the lives of the people. She's been recognized twice by the Queen of the UK. And I have a long list, by the way, to go on and on, but I will leave some for Karma to introduce herself. It's my privilege today to have Karma join us. Before I hand over to Karma, I want to share with you the structure, how this is going to be today. If you can move the slide for me, Sophia. So I'll just take probably another 5 minutes and give you a context of why do we have these Leadership at Humanity dialogues? Why do we set these up? What is the goal? Also talk a little bit about what has kept LEH team busy for the last 1 year or so. And then I will hand it over to Karma, who will introduce herself and the work she's been doing. Then I will lead a conversation with her on the topic of how do we build future leaders with character and capabilities. And then we will have time to take your questions. So this is how we have set up next about 55 minutes or so. Next slide for me, please. Thanks, Sophia. So just to give you a context, this is, as I said, it's a milestone for us. We just complete 1 year of LEH existence in about 3 days. On 1st of May, 2021, this was formed. Since then, we've been busy extending the message of humanity in leadership. So we just concluded our maiden or first Leadership at Humanity journey with about 11 leaders, some of them last week, and I'm delighted earlier part of this year in Ladakh. You can see that beautiful picture. It was a wonderful experience. Monica on the call today, being part of this journey where we want to extend the connection to those mentees who need support but may not have the support available from their companies or organizations. So we connected those leaders who were willing to give the gift of their time to those who actually need and benefit from that. And I'm kind of so thankful to all of you being part of this mentoring program and mentoring journey with us. And then we also concluded earlier this month MBA leadership course. So we tried trying to do a little bit of what Karma has been doing, which is initiating a dialogue on humanity in the universities. So we signed up with the National Economic University of Vietnam, and for their EMBA second year course, we concluded our first ever curriculum, which we created for the students and was very well received. So we continue to march on with our LEH dialogues, with our LEH journeys, with our mentoring program, with our education stream. And I'm looking at these people on the screen already gives me confidence that we are expanding the conversation around what we wanted or where we started. I'm very optimistic. And before I say anything else, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for standing by us, by being part of this journey, being part of our programs, participating in these LEH dialogues, and just encouraging us and reinforcing our belief that we are on the right track. So a big thanks to all of you. And with that, I'm going to invite Ms. Carma Elliot and request her to introduce herself before we get into the conversation. Over to you, Carma.
Thank you. If I may also add congratulations on your first anniversary as well, to the many congratulations you've had. It's been a long road, I'm sure, for you personally as well, fulfilling your mission and your vision for LEH. And now I think 1 year in, it's about building your legacy as well. So congratulations again to you and those who've been working in support of you. So just a very brief explanation of who I am and what I currently do. I am the inaugural college president of UWC, United World College Southeast Asia. We are the largest single international school in the world, with just short of 6,000 students across 2 campuses in Singapore. And this year we're celebrating our 50th anniversary as a college. We were established by the Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew back 50 years ago in response to Singapore's plans to develop the country following independence as an economic force in Southeast Asia. So always as a college, and particularly with Singapore's ability to attract international talent to Singapore, being seen as an essential service to the development of the country. And in fact, 50 years on, post-COVID, that remains the case, that we provide that service for the children of expatriates coming to live and work in Singapore. I also sit on the UWC International Board. We are one of 18 schools and colleges around the world. And UWC was set up now 60 years ago. So the first of the UWC colleges is celebrating 60 years. And what we have in common across the 18 schools and colleges is a shared mission, which recently, with our anniversaries in mind, we have validated. We've reaffirmed our mission as being as relevant now. In fact, in many cases, one would say more relevant than in those 60 years ago. And so we were established as colleges to build relations between different cultures and different peoples with peace and sustainable futures in mind. And sustainable futures was always seen as being the connection between man and nature. And so from the beginning, the vision and mission was to make sure that our young people were growing up in institutions and being challenged to develop in institutions where peace and sustainable futures were always front and center. And as I say, now probably more important than ever before. And, you know, a realization very early on in this movement of schools and colleges that if you bring young people together at an early age, and our children go from from kindergarten through to year 12, so they go off to university at the end of their time in the college, that you build trust and understanding through allowing young people to live and learn together and to share perspectives on the issues of the day. And that idea of a greater understanding of the other, whatever the other might be, being the great opportunity to build trust as well, is very much flourishing in our community and is, you know, is evidenced every day. We have something quite unique here in Singapore, and colleges also have a previous scholarship model. So for the 2 upper years in the school, we offer scholarships to young people from disadvantaged economic backgrounds. Often, you know, single parents may never have been to school before or had a formal education, may not, when they don't speak English, with our language instruction. And so altogether with those and day students, we have between 80 and 90 nationalities in the as well. So very much United Nations living and working together in Singapore. So
Carma, there is a little bit of a disturbance in your voice. We are kind of not able to hear clearly.
Oh, okay. I wonder if it's my internet. Do you think it's the internet, or maybe I've got something over the microphone?
Yeah, microphone closer could be better.
Okay, let me do that. So
Better
please.
already.
Please just wave at me, otherwise I'll keep going if you can't hear me. I've been in the college as the first college president, as Athol said, for the last 3 years. And I'll talk a little bit perhaps towards the end and in answer to questions about what we're currently doing both in my college and with our sister schools and colleges across the world, with the inflection point for many young people and for the world itself, but also inflection point in education. So the work that we're doing on reimagining education more generally. But really thinking through also what my career has been so far. I was brought up abroad, so I was born in Scotland, very proudly Scottish, as many Scottish people are. But my parents lived and worked abroad, so I left the UK when I was 3 months old. and spent my formative years in many countries around the world, and actually often not in a formal education setting. So my parents actually didn't send me and my brother to international schools often, but put us into local schools, which led to a love of languages. So I speak 6 languages, largely through having been, one might say, forced to. I wouldn't necessarily, as a president of an international school, advocate this. It depends very much on individual children, I think. But I very much flourished with the idea that I could, be learning a language and connecting to students from many different cultures as we moved around the world. My brother didn't, in fact, and he returned to the UK to go to boarding school. But from a very early age then, my parents, who had grown up in very small towns in Scotland, in fact, villages in Scotland, who neither of whom had gone to university themselves, had a formal education up to the age of 15 or 16, but they very much encouraged my brother and I to be curious and to explore our passions. So partly mine was then languages. I really very much enjoyed the way that language allowed you a doorway into these different cultures, and from a young age, the ability to make friendships. My brother, actually, his passion was rugby, and that actually is what led him to return to the UK, largely because he couldn't play rugby in some of the countries that we were in. But it was all very much about that passion and about being engaged in communities in the countries in which we live. So I'll come back to that idea of service and giving back to communities a little later. So I studied Chinese and German at university, and this is where I took full advantage of the opportunity as a UK national at that stage, actually, to live and work and study in multiple European countries without any challenge. So I had the opportunity as part of my degree. I spent a year in China in the mid-1980s, and I spent a year in East Germany when it was still East Germany. So one might assume I had an abiding interest in communism, but in fact I had an abiding interest in China and in Germany as a whole. But I did study at Karl Marx University in Leipzig, and my fellow students were largely North Korean, Vietnamese, and Chinese. Interestingly, at the same time, my fellow students in China, which was just starting to open up at that time, were not from former communist or communist countries, but largely from Japan, Germany, and Europe. So, very much a distinctly different international student population. And one of the things that I credit with my choice of career of going into the diplomatic service when I graduated from university was my experience living and working for those 2 years, or living and studying for those 2 years in those 2 countries. Because I saw at firsthand that when things go wrong as a foreign national living in another country, the role that the diplomatic service plays in providing consular services or pastoral care to its citizens. So both in China, where I met some remarkable people who saved one of my fellow students and a friend from who had anorexia nervosa, from starving herself to death effectively. And in East Germany, I was in East Germany at the time of the Chernobyl crisis. And actually the diplomats there, alerted us to the fact that the reason there were no vegetables in the store was because there was a nuclear cloud going overhead. So we weren't at that stage even aware that there had been a nuclear accident or incident in Chernobyl, and what they did to get us out of the country at a time which it was not easy to move on. But I saw very much the kind of selfless devotion. I mean, I think often we have a sense of diplomats as being part of an elite world and coming from establishment families or elite families. And in many countries that may well be the case. But in the UK, diplomats are apolitical, so you're not changing every time there's a change of regime or of government. but very much come from the general civil service. So I saw at firsthand what public service actually looked like, and public service as conducted abroad, with some of the very particular challenges that one sees, with those kind of examples I just described there. So when I was thinking about my future career, I did realize that I had the wonderful opportunity to commit to that kind of service myself, but also to remain, that professionally curious. So whereas I'd been encouraged to be sort of culturally curious before by my parents, there was an opportunity to sort of take that forward into a career where you have the privilege of being posted by your government to multiple countries to do multiple kinds of jobs often, but where, you have a sort of protection around you, around you're effectively an observer in a country, but you can build you can build programs, you can build partnerships that allow you to build that trust and understanding between peoples, which has always been something that motivated me. So from an early age, I was very much motivated by that idea that there was much to be gained from building those relationships between young people and sustaining those over time as well. My passion had always been, before I realized what the opportunities of public service could be to fit in with my own passions, my passion had always been China. And from the age of 6, people often ask me, at a time when people weren't, particularly from the West, were not necessarily going to live and work in China, why I chose to study Chinese. And it was really something that had been with me since I was 6 years old, when I had seen a film which had an enormous impression on me at that age. And I had said to my grandfather, who was watching the movie with me at that time, I'm going to go and live and work in China, and I'm going to build connections with other children. At that time, it was very much seeing opportunities as a 6-year-old to build those connections. So China has always been on my map of the world as somewhere where I wanted to live and work. And that has remained the case. So I have very much always in more recent settings, which has involved a long diplomatic career, which involved opportunities to build programs specifically latterly in culture, education, sport, scientific research, all of the ways that our two countries, specifically China and the UK, could connect in people-to-people relations. So what's otherwise called soft power, but I think actually that's a misnomer for something that is effectively building relations between people of all ages, but largely through education and through programs for young people. You build that trust and understanding that often when relations are disrupted at a hard power level, if that's the right word, in terms of geopolitics, often those other programs continue unabated where appropriate. And so coming out of the sort of disruptions in terms of conflict and so on around the world, or trade disputes and so on, those people-to-people relations have sustained and kept the door open between governments and between institutions, often like universities, that allow a smoother sort of glide path to restore what one might see as normal relations afterwards. And that's definitely the case, in a country like Russia, where my previous employer, the British Council, for a long time has had quite a sticky relationship with the Russian government, but remained open throughout that period. And even quite recently, when relations between our two governments have become particularly bad, even before the Ukrainian conflict, the British Council continued to build those relations between young people, and did a season of culture, for example, within the last 2 years, again to keep those doors open that we will need now to start to have those conversations when appropriate, in terms of restoring the balance in some of the imbalance in power that there is at the moment. So I've had the privilege, I suppose, of, on behalf of a country, building relations with a number of countries over the years. And that included, a time spent, I've spent most of my adult life in China, but I have spent time in 4 EU countries as well. And I spent 2 years in Saudi Arabia as the first female British diplomat in a frontline post. So I, was considered an honorary man, which in order to be able to work there, but there was generally a huge amount of respect from the fact that I was appointed by the Queen, and that meant that my government, however skeptical people might have been about a woman's ability to do the job, my own government thought that I was the right person to do the job and to start to open some new relationships there as well. So that was obviously a great privilege to be able to live and work there. And actually, I used to suggest that perhaps my government might like to pay me 2 salaries, because I was able to access parts of the economy and society that my male colleagues were not able to do. And that's the 50% of the population, which is women. And of course, many women in Saudi Arabia doing fantastic things even before all those most recent changes had happened. So being welcomed into both communities was an enormous plus at a time when terrorism was actually alive and well on the Arabian Peninsula. So it was actually a very difficult time to live and work there. And again, sustaining those people-to-people links and showing respect for different cultural norms at a time when those were also being challenged domestically by domestic terrorism was something that I took forward for the rest of my time as well. So remaining open to the, building relationships and looking at different perspectives, building trust in the other, even while that was being challenged almost every day by threats of terrorism as well. So I wonder whether it might be helpful at this stage if I talk about what service looks like in my current position. So as I mentioned, we have 6,000 students in the college, and they're spread across 2 campuses. And a reasonably large cohort of those students do come from disadvantaged economic backgrounds and from very, very different backgrounds to the majority of our students, who quite frankly come from privilege as well. And so I have found that looking at the reasons why we're all there, which is our shared mission, is very important in connecting all of our students, old and new. So we have some students clearly whose parents have been in Singapore a long time. So we have very well established members of the community, but we also have, we have quite a mobile community as well, but we also have these scholarship students who come for just the last 2 years of the course. But connecting into our mission, and in particular, our founders' instruction to us all. So that is also alive and well. Kurt Hahn was an amazing man who started the UWC movement, who talked very much about challenge and the opportunity that there was through challenge. And famously, he started both our movement, he was very involved with the Outward Bound movement, the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, and so on. Significantly, from the very beginning, the schools and colleges have had a strong connection to nature. So the challenge that is inherent in outdoor education and constantly challenging oneself as a young person, so from the age of 4 up, around the fact that he said that if only we challenge ourselves and we ask ourselves questions of ourselves and each other as we're growing up, we will find there is more in us that we take into our future lives. So the UWC movement in schools and colleges has always been very focused on that idea of developing leaders who are very connected into nature, but also are very focused on peace and a post-conflict world. So both avoiding conflict and post-conflict. So we have something in our college, which is one of our service opportunities, called the Initiative for Peace, where our students have created something. You may be familiar with the Model United Nations, but the Initiative for Peace was established 20 years ago with the notion that peace begins with me and you, and as all of us individually coming together to address issues of conflict. And of course, for young children, that means, conflict in the sense of having a row with your neighbor and fighting over the best seat in class and that sort of thing. But the Initiative for Peace has actually been used as a means for our students to connect to students in other countries where there is conflict or they are in a post-conflict situation, actually working on peace at a community level using a shared toolkit, which is now available 20 years on through open source licenses, common goods licenses. And in the early days, our students were involved in such community peace building in Sri Lanka, in East Timor, and in Cambodia as well. It's been a little bit more difficult to do in other than on a theoretical basis in COVID times. But actually that has been a significant piece of service of our young people and our teachers, of course, who guide them over the last 20 years. So typically in our context, in order to develop young people who want to make that impact in the future, whatever they go on to do, to be leaders in their own way in promoting peace and sustainable futures in the widest sense, typically that means that our teachers on a weekly basis are teaching 6 to 8 hours more than they might be in another comparator school, another IB school, and are leading many initiatives which are student-led in terms of the service program in the college. So many of our service partners and our young people, the service program is not an add-on, it's not an after-school activity. Again, it's embedded in the program. And many of our service relationships, again, they're developed by the students and sustained by the students. We've had them for the last 50 years. So our students have been going to talk to those with dementia in Rinsa Ages Hospital in Singapore for the last 50 years, for example. So young people from their very youngest years are realizing the benefits of connecting into nature through some of their service, but they're also realizing the rewarding and mutual benefit of service within the community in Singapore as the place that made us as a college, where we are lucky to be hosted by Singapore. We are guests here and all of our students are guests as well. And so thinking about that, maybe just to finish off by saying, that character building piece that Atul referred to from a young age comes through that commitment to service, outdoor education, that real challenge that our students create projects on their own and actually have to evaluate them for value for money and so on as well. But I think also, there are other challenges for our scholarship community that I mentioned as well, which overall is 200 students in a large community. But one of the things that we've done recently, and perhaps reverting back to the idea of privilege and how we make sure that the privilege of an excellent impactful education is extended beyond our community. How can we be more inclusive? So that's not just about talking about online education and a campus in the cloud and so on, but also that sense of belonging. How do we create a sense of inclusiveness around making sure that all of our community feel that they belong in what is a wonderful place with fantastic facilities that may be so out of kilter with the experience of our young scholarship students that it's very important from the outset of their experience, and in fact before they come to us, to establish that they belong in our community, because they are from the outset a significant part of our educational mission is to connect as many different perspectives from as many different countries at the youngest age possible, to help build that trust for the future as well. And that, of course, can be very challenging for the individuals concerned, very far away from their home countries, very disrupted often by things like COVID, visa regulations, all of those things. But fundamentally, that sense of belonging comes from having a shared mission. So back to what drives, what connects you together is a shared mission, perhaps a shared passion, that sense of common purpose that comes from passion and mission, and being relevant, staying relevant with what you're doing. So how we teach and learn these days is different, but it's from that, mission-led, student-centered, to developing of the future as well. And they are challenging. We grow them like that. So not only do we challenge them, but they challenge us. And that's how we like it to be. So perhaps if I leave it at that, Atul, have I covered the ground?
Thanks so much, Karma. It was fascinating. I mean, I knew part of it, but a lot of the details of your growth and what you're able to do or trying to do at the school is just fascinating. And I truly wish there are more institutions like UWC who are looking at, you talked about belonging, service, and sustainability at a very early age, in the students getting that kind of mindset, I think is building the right foundation for the future of this world. So thanks so much for sharing what you just shared with us. Now, I want to basically request everyone to start putting your questions in the dialogue box. So it's your session, our opportunity to specifically know from Karma if there are any questions on what she shared with us. And of course, I have a couple of questions for you, Karma. You actually covered most of it. What I was thinking, I'm going to ask you. So
Okay.
I don't know, you preempted me, but I'm gonna I'm gonna go ahead and ask you a couple of questions. Maybe starting with the choices you made in your life and career. And fascinating, when you were talking about early age, you were like 6 years old, telling your granddad you want to go to China. Not very many children at that age would have clarity of what they want in life. And then subsequently you continued to push the boundaries, going into languages which were not your kind of mother tongue, going into places for education, living and working in different countries. And even when you were in your career in the bureaucracy, you were pushing the boundaries and trying to see what else can be done, where your personal mission and purpose comes together with the work you were doing. So tell me, what influenced those choices? What were those influences, maybe people or experiences, which made you think like the way you thought?
That's a very interesting question, Atul. I think, at an early age, what definitely drove me was that my parents were particularly religious. They came from a church in Scotland, which is known as the Wee Free, or the Little Free Church, but a very unreformed, Christian church. So my father was brought up in a religion where you didn't, you could do no work on a Sunday. You couldn't cook or wash or anything on a Sunday. And actually, he lived in a place where there was, the community was, very much based on a community of brethren, effectively. So I was brought up in a particularly religious environment, sort of fundamental Christianity in that sense. But I so the movie I saw was a true story, actually, about a missionary who, as a servant, had gone to China on her own accord. So the Missionary Society in London had told her as a servant she didn't qualify as a missionary. And of course, in those days, brought up in that environment, I myself wanted to be a missionary. I wanted to be like Gladys, this woman who'd gone to China. And in fact, she had had a significant impact on the lives of many children. So when the war came and the children were left behind, she had walked halfway across China with the abandoned children. She had also had a big role to play in anti-foot binding when that movement was alive and well as well. So of course, she was a very inspiring person. And she had done that based on the fact that she created something called the Inn of the Sixth Happiness, and which involved telling Bible stories to the drivers of the mule trains as they were coming through the village in which she was based, and thus converting them to Christianity. So of course I thought this was a wonderful adventure. It was both it was a fantastic film with Ingrid Bergman, and that was what drove me as a sort of passion in those days. I think subsequent to that, what really then once I'd seen that, I did, in later years, move away from quite the same level of religious zeal, I suppose, but to something much, much deeper, I think, in that by the time I had moved to China to study, and actually was baptized for the first time there, in a way that I felt comfortable with. At that stage, I was very driven by the idea that, I wanted to continue to get to know China as a potential sort of anchor for my future career. So always fascinated by, the culture and the politics, of course, of China as well, such that I knew that I wanted that to be, a sort of anchor in my life. And the third thing then was that thing I mentioned around realizing that actually what I had assumed was a career pathway that might not be available to me because I didn't come from a privileged background. I'd always thought as diplomats, the ones I'd met before that living and working abroad were always quite fancy, and they went around in cars with little flags on the front. That I realized actually I met these people who helped to provide consular assistance and pastoral care to a couple of my friends, that I realized that actually these were just regular people and I could be one of them too. So I realized that public service genuinely was based on meritocracy, and that was what drove me then into that, that career pathway.
That's wonderful. That's great. I'm going to pick up now one of the questions from our audience for you. And the question is from Clarice. With her permission, I'm going to read it out for you. So Clarice says, first acknowledging Carma, your professional and personal background, and she feels your sincerity, the way you explained humanity in very simple ways is very much appreciated. Her question is around the students, and you talked about sustainability, service, and belonging. Are there any practical examples of these students, basically after maybe passing out and the work they are doing, where they are demonstrating these learnings which they're taking from the college?
Yeah. Very happy to, and thank you, Clarissa, for the question. So I would say that we've got a number of examples of where the opportunity provided through the education in the United World College, in our context and more widely, has made the kind of difference that we aim for. And that those individual students themselves, of course, are aiming for. It's a whole spectrum, of course. When you have 6,000 students in our context, you're inevitably you're going to have many who who go on different pathways. And what we aim for is that those that seek to be leaders, whatever they go on and choose to do. We have recently started an award, there's a lot of reluctance. I think the UWC community is quite a humble community, but there's been some reluctance to celebrate individuals in terms of offering awards to our alum who go on to significant future achievement. But we've got beyond that on the basis that we know that we need to share those stories to inspire the next generation of UWC students as well. So just to give you a couple of examples, we have an ex-student from Japan who was a scholarship student, and those are needs-based scholarships. So often, it's a full scholarship, which, to be honest with this group, just to say that, that's 150,000 Singapore dollars over 2 years. So, these are very much, it's based on privilege, of course, and, extending that to others. But we had a young man who came from Japan almost 20 years ago on one of those scholarships, who's now the Japanese astronaut who regularly tweets from the International Space Station about, and he shows a picture of his college as the space station goes overhead. He shares those photographs. But, a man from a very humble background who acquired English in the college and realized that, again, that the education he was now belonged to was a way of achieving a dream that he had had from a very young age as well. And actually within the program, really constantly reminding those who were selecting the astronauts through a very rigorous program that he had been through something equally rigorous before in terms of selection for the scholarship, but actually some of the challenges of the IB program is a very challenging program. So there's one there. Just to give you one other very practical example, is some of the maybe not one individual student, but actually the challenges of COVID recently have meant that many of our students on graduation have got stuck in Singapore because they can't go back to their home countries because they can't get back in, or they're not vaccinated and so on. But equally, there's been challenge for students coming into the college as well. We don't have refugees in our college because Singapore itself does not permit refugee students, but we do have a refugee program globally. We take internally displaced students. So actually since 2014, we've had internally displaced students from Ukraine dating back to the first conflict in the Donbass region as well. So that program has been alive and well for 6 or 7 years. So when the most recent conflict, when Russia went to war with Ukraine, invaded Ukraine, our students themselves set up a peace panel in order to bring together our families from Russia, whether they're scholars or families, day students, and our Ukrainian families and students, in order to raise money to send back to Ukraine, to raise money for support for Russian families actually who may now be stuck here in Singapore because the banking system has broken down and so on. So again, that was not through the guidance of any adult to tell them that was the right thing to do. It's almost, it's an instinctive reaction that comes from an action that comes from both the education and the upbringing, but the community in which they are, of being, those ideals being nurtured around care and humanity for the other, even while knowing that for many of our Ukrainian families, their brothers, uncles, fathers back home were being called to the front line, and their female relatives, without exception, actually now have all left Ukraine for elsewhere. So, against that kind of very difficult background, that was an expression of humanity, alive and well, and care for each other.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Karma. Next question is from Nyok, who's part of our team based in Vietnam. Her question is that in Southeast Asia specifically, we observe that our children, especially from those coming from underprivileged backgrounds, do not express a sense of possibilities or borderlessness, which other parts of the, kids from the other parts of the world are able to do. Any thoughts on that? How do you encourage or enable these children to look at the possibilities which they have?
Yeah, and to be honest, and being very practical here, Atul, I think that this is the challenge. How do you get the news out there, and actually, how do you explain the opportunity that there might be, whether it's in UWC or elsewhere, and actually the number of openings that are provided are quite small, regardless of which school group it might be that is able to do this. There are some opportunities, I think, that we need to do more of, and I think, again, potentially disrupted a little bit by COVID. But I think that, there's one thing around, I think, teacher training, and training the trainers in terms of, the pedagogy, so that, that there are those in the countries. So we in United World College, we have 156 national committees around the world. So each of those national committees is involved in the selection of our scholarship students, but actually they're also able to advise and help select, or to promote the UWC way and mission to others as well. And that is starting to happen in some other countries, particularly in refugee communities. So I think the opportunity through those national committees, through teacher training, perhaps provided in country then for those who wish to, to commit to a similar mission. I think the UWC education has developed in our curriculum. We were amongst those who innovated the IB diploma, and we're amongst those involved in the strategic review of it as well. That doesn't belong to us. Our curriculum is borderless. And so I think it's incumbent on us not to insist that if those who share our mission want to set up a school that is using the curriculum or using or following the mission, that it has to have a badge that says UWC Cambodia or so on. I think we need to be setting, following a path that allows for a UWC education to be borderless in that way, and associated with a brand, but not always branded in that way, which can be quite complex and very difficult to pursue in other countries. I think the final thing maybe is that I think that we need to there are a lot of people who, I'll say this is personal opinion, but there's a lot of people who were making a lot of money out of technology pre-COVID and made a lot of money during COVID as well on technology platforms. And I think there's more to be done of, encouraging entrepreneurs, philanthropy, and educators together to create, a borderless, massive, massive opportunity for an education that could be, if you had a campus in the cloud, which is my ambition, I'll be honest, hopefully encouraging people to put their money into it rather than going to space on a mass scale immediately anyway. But I think there's opportunities to bring together the world of technology and education much more, not just beyond the gadgets, and to look at how that looks like from the point of view of funding, and to take things out to the displaced communities, refugee communities, and to those who might otherwise not have any visibility of the opportunity that could be brought into their own classrooms.
Perfect. Thanks, Karma. And I think this is probably going to be our last question. So this is, and we have many more questions in the dialogue box. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to pick up Michael, a friend of mine based in Shanghai. Michael's question for you is, Karma, that at a very young age, you left your home country and you've been living and studying elsewhere. And then at a later stage of your career, you were actually representing your home country as a diplomat. How did you stay connected, or how did you maintain your deep connection with the UK culturally, otherwise, so that you could represent it in a more credible way?
So that's a very good question. Actually, I'm Scottish, both my parents were Scottish, and I have to say that wherever we went around the world, my parents, I have a slight Scottish accent, not a deep one, but I, always, drilled into us that first and foremost, we were Scottish and we should have at least a bit of a Scottish accent, whatever other languages we were learning. And, that was very important to my mum and dad, who'd come from really, very small places in Scotland, who themselves had been very brave and to go and live and work abroad as well. So I think always knowing that, every summer when I was very young, we would go back to Scotland in order to reconnect back into our roots. And that was largely around the fact that there are many from Scotland for historical reasons who were known as the sort of colonials. So a much larger percentage of the population who went to, live and work abroad in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and so on, and actually who did have this tradition of going back, maybe once every 5 years, not every year, to the home country and to celebrate their roots and their connections back into Scotland, and who would often come back to Scotland and retire as well. So that was always a big part of our life, that my roots were always in Scotland, and I must never forget that, as it were. But I think the main thing that I have found most important to remain connected to the UK is that sort of professional curiosity. So as my career has developed, I've done a number of different roles within the diplomatic service, and building those relationships as to how you can deliver partnerships with the other country, for whether it's companies, research institutes, universities, creative industries, and so on, getting to know how they work, how they're funded, and so on. So being very, staying abreast of all those issues. It used to be that the Foreign Office would make you go back. You had to spend your annual leave in the UK in order to sort of update yourself on the price of milk and the realities of the UK. That's no longer the case. And of course, with much better communications and internet and so on, not as necessary as before. But it is an essential part of staying current and staying relevant, of course, as well. That is much easier now than it used to be. And finally, I suppose, in terms of the connection back to Scotland in particular, the Scottish government, once I retired from the diplomatic service, of course, I had to previously, I had to previously represent the whole of the UK, asked me to be something called a global Scot, which gives me enormous pleasure that at this stage in my career, I can actually specifically support my own sort of, the appreciation of my own country and my own cultural identity as well, and specifically promoting higher education opportunities between Scotland and the wider world as well. So I think, it takes effort and time, but I think it's, it's an essential part of staying relevant, I think.
Yeah. This is wonderful, Carmen. Thanks very much. I know we are at time, it's slightly over time. I want to thank you from all of us for being with us and giving us an inside view of your life journey, but also the amount of work which you are able to do. And as I said in the beginning, further reinforcing our belief in humanity and how it helps you to really expand the impact around you and others. So thanks very much for joining. All our visitors and people who joined the conversation today, thanks so much. We will continue to bring more such conversations and dialogues to you, and have a wonderful rest of the day, morning, evening, afternoon. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thanks.